I think it's really important, especially now. And I've developed a model I call the ABCs to really think about three main factors that will help in really building these relationships.
Hi, everyone. Welcome to the Childcare channel and the Childcare channel podcast. Our intention is for this to be a space where we come together to elevate the childcare industry through community, inspiration, and innovation that will ultimately serve the healthy development of children. In today's episode, we're going to be focusing on how parents and educators can communicate more effectively with children and particularly how they can nurture qualities such as creativity, compassion, and confidence in kids through the ways we listen and talk to them. And to lead us into this conversation, we have our guest, Rebecca Rolland, with us today. Rebecca Rolland is the author of The Art of Talking with Children, a book designed to support educators, parents, and caregivers in enhancing their interactions with children. She's a nationally certified speech-language pathologist who has worked clinically with populations ranging from early childhood all the way through high school and now provides teacher professional development. She's currently an education lecturer at Harvard and has also served as an oral and written language specialist in the learning disabilities team at Children's Hospital Boston. We are beyond excited to learn from Rebecca today, so please help me in giving her a warm welcome to the Childcare channel. Rebecca, so good to have this conversation with you here today. How are you feeling?
I'm great. How are you?
I'm feeling great. Rebecca, I'd like to ask, what is your intention for our time together in this next few minutes here?
I'd really like to just support as much as possible the people who work with children and recognizing that the small interactions that we have every day that we often don't think a lot about are some of the most important chances to build their skills.
I love that. I love that. And communication is something that it really is an art. And it's so important for not just children, but everyone to be able to communicate effectively, to express our needs, to be able to relate. I mean, it goes into relationship building, and I'm really excited to talk about all of this with you today, particularly. But first, I want people to get to know Rebecca, so tell us a little bit about yourself, that your early starts, how you even got into this field. We'll love to learn.
Sure. So I actually wear a few hats. I'm the mom of two kids. I have a 6-year-old and an 11-year-old. And I'm also a researcher and a lecturer. So I really bring all of my different hats together to think about how we care for kids and how we work with them. And my book actually and my work started when I realized we don't actually focus a lot on how we interact with kids. I was a young mom myself and kind of trying to figure it out. And I realized I knew a lot about conversation, but there wasn't a lot out there about how we could actually implement this in our daily lives.
I love it. I love it. And so let's talk about that. Let's start with your book, right? So I know the book, I think it was published in 2022. Is that right? How did that come about?
So I actually was studying as a speech pathologist a lot about language and communication. And I was also writing about my family. And I came to the realization that I actually didn't spend a lot of time intentionally thinking about my conversations with my kids, even though I knew as a speech pathologist it was so important. And I thought that's so ironic that someone who focuses on this actually kind of is on autopilot a lot of the time. And I wondered, this must be true for me. So maybe it's true for a lot of other people. And the more I reached out to other people, the more I realized that we have this huge focus on caring for kids, but we really don't pay attention to kind of all of those moments that make up the bulk of their days. And that inspired me to think a lot more about this.
I absolutely love that. But while we're on this, can you share some examples of like a mundane day-to-day dialogue that we don't really think about and how that can be an opportunity to really teach the child?
For sure. Yeah. So I think a lot about mistake making and how we respond when we fail at something or when we make a mistake. And I remember one day my daughter, who did not like making mistakes, she was about 3 years old, and she came up to me when I was coming back from work and I was completely drenched because I had forgotten my umbrella. And she looked at me and she kind of laughed and she said, oh, that was your mistake. You should have brought an umbrella. And in that moment, my first reaction was to respond in irritation, and say, well, sure, I should have, but I was in a rush, or, to kind of push. But then I stopped and kind of took a breath and thought, well, this is an opportunity to talk about how I can bring compassion to myself, how I can say, well, maybe I should have, but let's think about what could I do next time so I don't forget. How can I actually address this? And I realized that tiny shift can make a change in how I think about myself and in the relationship with my child as well.
Wow, what a powerful anecdote. I mean, this is how many times, if you're a parent, right, and you're listening to this, how many times on a day-to-day basis do we make mistakes, right? And how many times do kids point them out?
Exactly. We get annoyed. That's just natural.
Right? So what a great thing to look at this as an opportunity to number one, work on your own nurturing of your own, what is called the inner child, right? But on your own
Exactly.
self-compassion as a parent, as a human. And then number two, to teach your child to do the same. Because guess what? If the child, like your daughter, and since she was 3, right, and she didn't like to make mistakes, none of us like to make mistakes, right? Because
Right.
mistakes subconsciously means that we are not accepted, we're not good enough, and that's not what we're designed to feel like, right? So, of course, the child is going to be like, oh, made a mistake, not good.
Exactly.
So by you nurturing this compassion and talking in this way, you're teaching her that she can do the same for herself.
Exactly. Yeah.
So I love that. I love that example. Okay, so tell us a little bit, because obviously you're very well educated in the world of psychology, education, children, and you mentioned to me that you did get your PhD in education from Harvard. Can you tell me what inspired you to pursue that to begin with?
Yeah, so I was actually working as a speech language pathologist in schools and doing a lot of work on the talk kids were having, kind of building their language skills. And the more I was working, the more I thought, well, actually, there's so much we don't know about how our talk affects children's talk and kind of that back and forth. And so I was really interested in studying that relationship because I realized I didn't know what to say to kids. I didn't know how to respond. I mean, I knew there were, some research out there about their language, but what about the actual interaction? There really wasn't much about that.
Mm.
And it kind of came out of that frustration that I wanted to know more and to do that research myself.
I love that. And when you were doing this, were you already a mom or this happened after?
It was actually, I had my first child while I was doing my research. Yeah, I was working with preschool teachers actually to work on their own stress management as they talked with kids as part of a larger research project. And during that time, I had my daughter. So it was really actually research in the making. The whole thing.
How perfect is that, right? You can't make this stuff up. So I want to go back to something you just said, right? With working with stress management and the preschool teachers, and particularly how to communicate with children, right? I know that we have in the world of preschool a ton of different resources, such as the transition songs and things like that. So let's dive a little bit deeper into this type of work, right? Tell us if a preschool teacher or an ECE teacher is listening to this interview, can you maybe share some useful tips and things they can think about when communicating with the children in their classroom?
Sure. Yes. I think first is to really think about small ways to check in with kids. And it doesn't
Mm.
always have to be, words. It doesn't always have to be, how are you doing? You can create visuals. You can think about, well, let's see, how high are you up on the energy scale? How full of energy? How sleepy? How funny do you feel? And actually starting to use more emotion words with kids and starting to label and talk about your own emotions. Even say, oh, I'm starting to feel frustrated. What can I do when I feel frustrated? And modeling that. So by doing that, you're doing a couple of things. First, you're actually helping yourself because we know that when you start to put words to feelings, it can actually help you calm down and feel more in control. And you're also helping children know what they can do when they feel frustrated. Because often, obviously, young kids haven't learned all of those skills. When they say, oh, I feel frustrated, I'll just throw something. Or I feel frustrated, I'll hit someone. And that happens. But that's something that we can support children not to do by teaching them and modeling those alternatives.
I love that. I love that. And so a lot of times the preschool teachers have multiple children to manage and communicate with at once. Do you have, and I mean, I know that can get a little overwhelming when Tommy's doing one thing in the corner and Patricia's doing some other thing in the opposite side of the classroom. And so what would you recommend to a teacher in this situation to kind of like create that sense of coming together, community, and everybody on the same page?
Yes, I think it's so important to have rituals and routines that help everyone in the class take a moment, whether it's a moment of quiet or even a moment of activity. Sometimes it can help, for example, to have all the kids do a dance or do something really, really active and kind of be intentionally loud so that they can then take the time to be quiet and have kind of quieter bodies. I think we often want kids to be quiet or want kids to settle down, but without giving them the time and the opportunity to get some of that energy out in really active ways. So I think if we can really support kids in teaching them, well, this is the time for active play. This is the time to calm down, and having, whether it's a bell or, a song or some kind of routine to support them in moving from one to the other.
I love that. I love that. I know that one of the big things in communication is this relationship building, right? And we've gone through a pandemic, and I feel like being isolated, not just for children, but for their parents, for the teachers, for everybody. I mean, we were all in this together, right? So we went through like a good year to 2 years of isolation, and I feel like we're not yet fully 100% back to normal when it comes
Yes.
to relating to other people and communicating and even making friends.
Mhm.
So I know that this is an area that you have quite a lot to share on. So can you maybe share with us for both the children and the adults that care for them, whether it's the parents or the teachers, how we can kind of like, shift our minds to build better friendships and relationships?
Yes. Yeah. So I think it's really important, especially now. And I've developed a model I call the ABCs to really think about three main factors that will help in really building these relationships. And the first is just A, it stands for adaptive. And that just means to really focus on going with the flow of the person in front of you. So, what's their mood like? Where are they? Kind of what mental place are they in today? And actually just checking in and noticing that. And the B is back and forth. So rather than thinking about talking kids, we're thinking about talking with them. So actually giving them more chances to have things to say, to express themselves, and to create a balance between adult and child. And C is the child driven. So actually thinking about starting with what kids are thinking about, what's on their mind, what kind of conflict they're having, rather than coming in with our own agenda. Let's just actually take a moment and sit with what's on a child's mind. I think those three factors, when we put those into place, kind of those ABCs, can really help.
Love that. The ABCs, and it's easy to remember as well.
Exactly.
And so if you're watching this, please take notes because here Rebecca is teaching us gold mines for not just communicating with children, but communicating with adults and communicating with each other. So Rebecca, tell us now for adults, right? So, and by the way, this applies to even college students that are just exiting the nest of the college environment, right? So all of a sudden now you are adulting, right? And
Exactly.
and now it's up to you to go out of your way to foster relationships. So maybe can you share some tips for how we could do that better?
Yes, I think one thing is to just take a moment and notice what your agenda is in listening to somebody and trying once in a while to try to drop your own agenda for a few moments and really attend to what is the agenda of the other person. So I'll just give an example. Say someone really wants to come and talk to you because they're having a really difficult day or a problem with their partner. And our tendency may be we want to be helpful, but we think immediately, well, this is like a problem I had with my partner. And you start with another story that sort of goes onto a tangent about that. So in the end, you feel like you expressed yourself, but the other person never quite got to unwind their concern or never really got supported in that. So often, if we can just take a moment and sit with another person's concern or their excitement or their happiness and coming in with our own story, that can be a big way of kind of creating an inroad.
I love that. And this made me think of another question, right? So if you were to apply what you just said, and then specifically was talking about adults, right? How can we or how can teachers teach this practice of the, intentional listening agenda to children, small children?
Yes, yes. I think there's a couple of ways. One is what I call curious waiting. So, really, there's just two parts. So, one part is just to wait, to give some extra time to another child if they're trying to express themselves. Because oftentimes, I see it at my own dinner table, I see it all of the times in schools. We want to be part of the conversation, but we can jump and kind of cut off a child at the pass. And this is especially true for younger children or children who have trouble expressing themselves. So they might say, it's this, and we want to help, but sometimes the child doesn't really get their point across. So just waiting is one. And then the second is teaching children and even young children questions they can ask their peers to help their friends or their classmates tell more. So even things like, oh, that sounds interesting, or what do you mean by that? Or I don't understand. Can you explain it to me? Those kind of questions can really help children actually become better conversation partners to their peers.
I hadn't really thought about that, because I'm a big student of Tony Robbins, for example, and he's always saying questions are the answers, right?
Yeah.
So, I hadn't really thought about the importance of making it a point to teach children since an early age how to ask questions, especially in such a simple context as an interaction when they're talking to their friends, right? And these are some key questions that you just share. What do you mean by that? What are you trying to say? And things like that, right? So I think this is wonderful. Now, let's bring it back to your book. Tell us a little bit about the framework of the book and specifically the main concepts that you're teaching there. I believe there's a concept there about double promise that I wanted to ask you about. So if you wouldn't mind sharing that.
So the double promise is really, I can start there. It's about the idea that conversation with children does two things. So there's two promises. The first is in the moment. So actually, when you have these deeper conversations, you improve your relationships and have more fun with kids. So it's actually more interesting because you're talking about kind of big ideas or feelings rather than just about, get your coat up or something like that. The second promise is that over time, all of these small moments are accumulating. So children are actually building skills over time, like confidence and creativity. And we don't always see it. So in the moment, it doesn't feel like, oh, this conversation is making this child more creative. But when you look back, say 3 months or 6 months later, you'll see, oh, this child wasn't doing those kind of creative things 3 months ago. So I think that double promise is something we talk about a lot in the book. And I organize it around 7 key themes. So really trying to think about 7 areas that we can use conversation to build skills. And those areas are learning, empathy, confidence, social skills, play and creativity, openness to others, and also temperament. So those are kind of the 7 areas that I've put together, and you can read chapter by chapter or just pick and choose.
Now, is this book geared towards just parents, to teachers? Who would be the best beneficiary of the book?
Yes, it's really meant for everyone who interacts with kids. So I talk about kind of the kids in your life because I think it is for parents, certainly, and teachers, but it's also if you are a neighbor or a cousin or a babysitter or anyone who nurtures children or is interested in helping raise them.
I love it. And I know we were talking about relationships earlier, but there's a point that you mentioned to me before we started, which was to really focus there first and to be more proactive about it. Can you go deeper into what you mean by that?
Sure. Yeah. So I think often, especially when we're stressed or there's a lot of children, it can be easy to notice behavior problems and react to them. And that's kind of become our mindset. So we feel like we're putting out fires, and this child is doing this and this child's doing that, and we need to kind of manage all of that. And that's totally understandable. Yeah, I've definitely been there. But I do think that we can also shift the framework and think first about, well, how can we help children feel connected to us and connected to each other in a way that can prevent some of these behavior problems? So we don't actually feel like we're running from one place to the other, putting out fires, but we actually feel like, oh, we can think ahead and we can help children so there are fewer of these kinds of conflicts.
I love the focus on prevention. I think it was Benjamin Franklin that said, an ounce of prevention is worth a pound of cure, right?
Yes.
So I love that you are doing that and you're focusing it on being more proactive with the connection of the child feeling. Really, it's about the child feeling safe,
Yes.
right? Feeling that they're part and they're not alienated from adult world, right?
Yes.
So are there any particular practices that somebody can apply, like step by step, of how to create that environment for a child?
Yeah. So it's funny. I talk about this kind of like building a house, talking with children. And the first step is just to set that foundation. And the foundation really is to think about your tone. So think about kind of how are you engaging with children? Are you inviting them, at least at first, to do things? Or is it more kind of barking at them? Or are you really kind of telling them? Is there a sense of collaboration? Can you make even something like cleaning up kind of collaboration between you? Not that you should say, don't clean up, but you could say, well, let's choose. What should we clean up first? How should we do it? Where should this go? So you can create that kind of openness and warmth and collaborative environment with children. It can go a long way toward cooperation.
Thank you so much for sharing that, Rebecca. If you're watching this and you're liking these tips, please make sure that you share this video, that you subscribe to the channel, give it a thumbs up so that we can invite more people like Rebecca here to the Childcare channel. And Rebecca, I want to now ask you a bit more on the personal side. What do you believe is your biggest calling here in this lifetime?
Well, that's a big question. I guess I would say I really am focused on authenticity and supporting children to be their most authentic selves and to support that also in my own work and in my work with other adults. I think communication for me is a way not just of working with words and working with, how we say things, but really of how we express ourselves and how we help children to express themselves also.
I love that. And do you have an anecdote of any point in your life, of any age in your life, where you realized, wow, communication is a pretty big deal. I need to pay attention to this.
Yes, actually, I do. I would say the first internship that I had as a speech pathology student, I was working with older patients, actually. So, older people tended to be who had brain injuries and who often had lost the ability to speak, or at least to speak very much. And we did something called music intonation therapy. And that was where you actually hold the patient's hand and do kind of tapping a beat and you sing together old songs or songs from the patient's childhood. Even things like Happy Birthday or Mary Had a Little Lamb or things like that. And there's a lot of research actually showing that these old songs actually can help a person develop more language or get back some language. And also that they can often sing them even when they can't say very much. And I did this with several patients, and I was just so amazed. There was one man I worked with who actually wasn't speaking much at all. And when we did this, his face just lit up and he was just, able to sing Happy Birthday. And it was almost as if he was having this moment where he remembered more of who he was. And to me, that was just sort of so astonishing to be in that moment and to feel like I was a part of that.
Wow, that is a powerful, powerful story. And it's interesting because, well, I believe, right, we are in this body, right? I believe we're a lot more than just the body, right? I can recall a similar story. My aunt Norma, she was literally on her deathbed and she couldn't speak anymore, very advanced Alzheimer's. So, you feel like they're not all there and you don't
Yeah.
think they recognize you and anything like that. And, it was in her last week and I remember visiting her and I remember saying to her, you know, because of you, you brought me to this country because I'm from Cuba originally, and Cuba, I don't know if you know anything, but very
Yeah.
little opportunity to none there for anybody. So I said, thanks to you, you brought me here and I am doing all of these things and I have a desire to contribute to the world in this way. And you are part of that. And even though she couldn't speak, even though she couldn't respond to me, tears were rolling down her eyes as I was
Wow.
saying this
That's
to her.
amazing. Wow.
And so the fact that what you just shared, right, about this anecdote of working with this gentleman who couldn't really speak very much, but all of a sudden lit up, speaks to the fact that there's something beyond just your motor skills of mouthing words,
Yeah.
beyond just communicating in the way that we know how to communicate. There's such a thing as I don't know, but let's say energetic communication or
Yeah.
just soul to soul communication or whatever you want to call it. I
Yes,
don't have
for
the
sure. For
answers,
sure.
right?
Mhm.
But this is so important, and the fact that you're suggesting that this is what we focus on first for the children, I think you're on the right track with that mindset. Now let's talk about a bigger question when it comes specifically to the childcare industry as a whole. I know we're in the United States, so specifically within the United States, we know there are challenges in the childcare industry as a whole. So, what would you say is one of the biggest needs within the childcare industry that must be addressed?
I would say, for one, definitely the pay issues. I think that is really just to be able to raise the bar and say that we support early childhood educators in a way that actually they deserve to be supported. I think that's the first to really help people recognize that it is a very valuable profession, one of the most valuable professions, and should be funded that way. And secondly, I would say to educate early childhood teachers, not just in the ways that we tend to think about it with kind of one-off lectures or things focusing on first aid, which is obviously important, but really getting into it and supporting them in their classrooms day after day to coach them into these kinds of communication strategies.
I love that. And are there any suggestions that you have where somebody could take action right now? Is there anything that you suggest a parent can do or a teacher can do or anybody that's relevant can do to start shifting there?
Yes. I mean, I think for one, obviously to advocate for those funding things, whether it's writing letters or supporting the local government to do so. But I also think in terms of advocating even at a whole school to think about shifting some of the resources away from simply these one-time professional development occurrences and think about how can we put in place longer term things that really will help improve the relationships teachers have with children.
I love it. All right. Well, Rebecca, thank you so much for sharing of yourself and your expertise here with us at the channel. Before we wrap things up, I want you to share with us where can people find you?
So I have a website, which is just RebeccaRolland.com with two C's in Rebecca and two L's in Roland. And you can also find my weekly newsletter there. And as well, you can find my book on Amazon.
Amazing. Thank you for that. Okay, so the game that we play is called Three in a Beat. And it's a very simple game that we like to do with guests where I ask you a question and you answer with either one word or one short sentence. Are you ready to play?
Yes.
So, first question, Rebecca. Your favorite childhood dish, what was it?
Ooh, mac and cheese.
I love it, the
Sure.
classic. If you could put a message on a billboard, what would it say?
I would say find joy, I think.
I love that. I love that. And last but not least, what is the number one skill parents of small children should have today?
Ooh, I would say how to be curious. Because I think if you're curious, your child will follow your curiosity.
I love it. Rebecca, thank you so, so much. You have been an absolute joy to have on the channel. If you have been watching all this time, please give this episode a thumbs up. If you haven't yet subscribed to the channel, it would be really helpful to us that you do. That way we can reach more people, invite more guests, and hopefully create this impact in the childcare industry that we're wanting to have. Rebecca, any last words before we wrap it up?
Thank you. This has been wonderful. Best of luck.
Thank you. Thank you so much. And you always have a home here in the Childcare channel. And you watching, I'll see you in the next episode.